Thank you very much, Ms. Figueres, for your for giving us a clear picture on what happened in Cancun and what would be the possible way forward toward Durban. I think that you said that the Cancun Agreement represents a big step forward for the community of nations, but a small step for the planet. Also, you right now mentioned that towards COP17 Durban, international community or nations would need to share the sense of what is politically realistic and at the same time, what would be the environmentally ambitious one. I think we need to have at the same time, two different approaches or thinking. One is what would be the politically realistically achievable goal, and at the same time, what we need to do to ensure the environmental integrity. What level of ambitions we need to have. We need to have to achieve our ultimate goal of limiting 2 degrees Celsius surface temperature rise or peaking global emissions by maybe 2015 or 2020. So it's not easy for us to achieve these two targets at the same time. So first question that I would like to ask you is that I quite agree with you that in saying that it is absolutely critical that even though the Cancun agreements represent a small step for the planet, but still it is, politically speaking, a very major step forward. So the first thing we need to do would be how to operationalize Cancun agreements. There may be a number of challenges. You already mentioned why do you think that Cancun agreements is a major step forward, but what do you think are the major challenges in order to operationalize Cancun agreements as soon as possible, hopefully at Durban COP17? Of course, I understand that there are many challenges lying ahead of us. So it may not be easy for you to select a small number of challenges, but nevertheless, I'm very much interested in knowing your views on what should be the what we should focus on, what major challenges we should focus in order to operationalize Cancun agreements.
Let's see, I think that we need to, as we approach Durban, I think we need to think in two parallel streams, out of both sides of our brain. On the one hand, there is a very long list of tasks that governments agreed for themselves in Cancun, some of which they delegated to the Secretariat to support them with. And all of those tasks must be achieved during this year in order to firm up the ground. I think of Cancun almost as the building, the gradual building of the next step of the climate regime, where Cancun is actually the foundation on which we're building. And we cannot build a high building unless we have a firm foundation. Cancun is the firm foundation, and we have to make sure in Durban that the foundation really is firm and is there in place. In that context, I would say there are at least 5 things that need to be done in order to firm up the foundation. The first, I would say, is fast start finance. And in May, all developed countries must report to the Secretariat what they're doing on fast start finance with a degree of transparency with respect to additionality and sourcing and allocation of the first fast start financing. The second is the creation of the Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund, that the Cancun agreements have already agreed to. And there, the Secretariat is already helping to organize the Transitional Committee, which is the group of 40 representatives of governments that will have the responsibility to take upon themselves the design of this fund throughout this year and submit the draft design to all parties in Durban. The third is the technology mechanism. And there, again, there is a design process that that governments have given to themselves for this year, and the Secretariat is already engaged with countries to do this. The technology mechanism is to be operational by next year, so all of the decisions on the design and operation of the technology mechanism and the Network Center of Technology need to be taken this year. The fourth is the adaptation framework. One of the major achievements of Cancun is to finally, the regime has recognized that adaptation is just as important as mitigation. In fact, for some countries, adaptation is more important than mitigation, and hence countries in Cancun put together an adaptation framework that is going to help to support adaptation efforts around the world. The fifth is the effort on MRV, on monitoring, reporting, and verification. As you know, countries in Cancun agreed to a two-way MRV process design. One is the MRV of emission reductions in both industrialized as well as in developing countries, and the other is the MRV of the funding provided by industrialized countries to developing countries. And so both, that's a two-way street of MRV, and both of those need to be designed during this year. So that and a couple of other things, but those I would say are sort of the five big pillars of the foundation that needs to be firmed up during this year. At the same time, in Durban, we must not only adopt the work on these five issues, but actually Durban needs to be looking ahead as to how the ambition is going to be raised. As I said in my opening words, the current ambition that we have on the table, despite the fact that it is the highest ambition, the highest collective ambition that we have ever had, way beyond the Kyoto Protocol, the fact is it's only 60% of the reduction efforts that we must have to get to the 2 degrees centigrade. And hence, in Durban, we must begin to think about how are we going to close that gap. We also must begin to think about, or continue to think about, what is the legal form going to be as we move forward. We have, as you know, a discussion about whether the Kyoto Protocol will go into a second commitment period or not, and if it does, how that needs to be accompanied by other agreements under the convention. And so those legal questions that will house the mitigation pledges of all countries also need to be addressed in Durban.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's start talking about the gap. You mentioned only 60% of the reduction needed towards 2 degrees. So I would like to listen to the Oppenheim-san's opinion. Maybe you are not representing any government or any region, but could you tell something about what would be how we can fill the gap?
Absolutely, thank you. Is this on? Okay, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, as has been said already, this is about political will in the end, and closing the gap is all about national political will. We talked about bottom-up and top-down approaches. I think it's fair to say that you have to have both. Governments have to give the signals to business that they mean what they say about cutting emissions and supporting a low-carbon transition. And then the private sector will move, businesses will move, and you'll have the bottom-up activity. But it's very hard for businesses to make their investment decisions in a political vacuum without some kind of clear signal from government that they'll be supported, and this is a long-term aim. I also think although the science is clearer and we're seeing more and more signals that the science is accurate from various climatic events going on around the world, from pieces of academic work that are coming out. Most recently, the one published last week on the floods in the UK, indicating that the likelihood of the floods had been multiplied many times, probably by climate change. And I think whilst we have clearer science, certainly amongst OECD countries, so Japan and my country, the UK, there's less confidence in those countries. You know, there's anxiousness about economy, about jobs, and about you know, other issues as well, other threats that we see in the world, terrorism, for example. So in this climate where we need to be bold, there's less confidence around amongst the countries that need to show boldness, and that's a challenge. In terms of legal form on the KP2 issue, I would say that the EU and the UK want a legally binding commitment which covers all countries, just the same as Japan does. So we share the same goal. We believe that that's the ultimate ideal goal, but realistically, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that before the end of the Kyoto Protocol in 2012. So we need to have something between the end of Kyoto and the beginning of what we can agree on, whenever that starts. And at the moment, the Kyoto Protocol is the best way to keep the momentum going. It's still a legally binding framework, and that's the only one out there. So whilst it's not perfect, it's the best that we have, and that's why we have the position that we do about the Kyoto Protocol. We don't think it's perfect, and we don't want to extend it, but in the circumstances, that's the best option we have, and we're certainly in the market for ideas for better options, which will get us to the same place.